After studying this module, we shall be able to understand what managers do in organizations, describe the functions approach to management, explain the roles approach to management.
A manager is one who is responsible for the subordinates and resources of the organization. In this sense, managers include organizational planners, organizers, leaders and controllers. Simply stating, a manager is what a manager does. In words of Stoner, managers do the following: work with others and work through others, bear the ultimate responsibility for organizational results, balance divergent goals and set priorities, think conceptually and critically, assume risks and make difficult decisions. Managing is the process of getting things done by and through others. How a manager gets things done through other people?
We will initiate the topic through a simple question. What do managers do? Managers work with others and work through others. They bear the ultimate responsibility for organizational results. They balance divergent goals and set priorities. They think conceptually and critically, and they assume risks and make difficult decisions. In the words of Henry Fayol, to manage is to forecast and plan, to organize, to command, to coordinate, and to control.
In the words of E.F.L. Bridge, management is a process consisting of planning, organizing, motivating, coordinating and controlling. Davis said that there exist three main functions of a manager: planning, organizing and control. According to Davis, command and coordination facilitate control and hence are part of it. But some believe that coordination is not a separate function of management, but is the essence of management, since the basic objective of all management is to achieve coordination in organized efforts. Gluick coined the acronym PODSCOP to describe the functions of management, namely planning, organizing, directing, staffing and coordinating, reporting and budgeting. George R. Terry mentioned four managerial functions as planning, organizing, actuating and controlling. Massey suggested seven functions of management, namely decision making, organizing, staffing, planning, controlling, communicating and directing. Kuntz and O'Donnell believed in the classification of managerial functions as planning, organizing, staffing, directing and controlling. They said, in practice it is not always possible to place all managerial activities neatly into these categories, since the functions tend to coalesce. Analysis of the work of a manager reveals that we can adopt two approaches: the functions approach, that is what the managers are supposed to do, and the roles approach, that is what the managers actually do.
For studying the functions of a manager, we can adopt two approaches: the functions approach that emphasizes on what managers are supposed to do, and the roles approach that emphasizes on what managers actually do. We shall discuss both the approaches in detail. Let us begin with the roles approach. Role is defined as the pattern of behavior that is defined for different positions. It refers to the expected behavior of occupant of that position, not all their behaviors, but to what he does as an occupant of that position. According to Henry Mintzberg, managers play 10 different but highly interrelated roles. By managerial roles, he meant behaviors attributable to a job or a position. Now we will continue this approach by defining each role a manager is supposed to play. After systematically observing activities of 5 CEOs in a variety of organizations, Mintzberg classified these roles into three general categories: interpersonal roles, informational roles, and decisional roles. Let us discuss these roles one by one.
Managers assume various roles. Henry Mintzberg has defined the role of managers to identify what managers do in the organizations. Role is defined as the pattern of behavior which is defined for different positions. It refers to the expected behavior of occupant of that position, not all their behaviors, but to what he does as occupant of that position. According to Henry Mitzberg, managers play 10 different but highly interrelated roles. By managerial roles, he meant behaviors attributable to a job or position. After systematically observing activities of 5 CEOs in a variety of organizations, Mintzberg classified these roles into 3 general categories. First, the interpersonal roles. This include the figurehead role, that is performing ceremonial and social duties as the organization's representative, and the leader role, and finally the liaison role, particularly with outsiders. Second, the informational roles, which include the recipient role, receiving information about the operation of an enterprise, the disseminator role, passing information to subordinates, the spokesperson role, transmitting information to those outside the organization. Third, the decisional roles, which includes the entrepreneurial role, the disturbance handler role, the resource allocator role, and the negotiator role, dealing with various persons and groups of persons.
Let us discuss these roles one by one. Interpersonal roles. 3 interpersonal roles help the manager keep the organization running smoothly. These are the figurehead role, the liaison role, and the leader role. In figurehead role, the manager performs activities which are of ceremonial and symbolic nature. These include greeting the visitors, attending social functions involving his employees, awarding merit certificates and other awards to outstanding employees. In liaison role, the manager serves as a connecting link between his organization and outsiders or between his department and other departments. Manager's leader role involves leading his subordinates and motivating them. Informational role of manager includes communication giving and receiving information, both within and outside the organization. Information is required to make effective decisions. These are 3 types of informational roles of a manager: monitor, disseminator, and spokesperson. In his monitoring role, the manager constantly collects the information about those factors which affect his activities. In the disseminator role, the manager distributes the information to his subordinates who may not be in a position to collect it. As a spokesperson, the manager represents his organization or department while interacting with outsiders. These may be customers, financiers, government, suppliers, or other agencies of the society. Decisional roles. In his decisional role, the manager performs 4 roles: entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, and negotiator. As an entrepreneur, the manager assumes certain risk which is involved in terms of the outcomes of an action because these are affected by a variety of external factors. As a disturbance handler, the manager is required to contain those forces and events which tend to disturb the organizational equilibrium and normal functioning. These forces and events may be strike by employees, shortage of raw materials, employee complaints and grievances, etc. As resource allocator, the manager allocates human, physical, and financial resources to various organizational units according to their needs. As a negotiator, the manager negotiates with the various interest groups in the organization. Such interest groups may be shareholders, employees, or outside agencies.
Decisional role of a manager involves choosing the most appropriate alternative out of the available ones so that the organization achieves its objectives when the chosen alternative is put into action. In his decisional role, the manager performs 4 roles: entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, and negotiator. As an entrepreneur, the manager assumes certain risk which is involved in terms of the outcomes of an action because these are affected by a variety of external factors. Since these factors are dynamic and change constantly, the manager is required to bring suitable changes in the organizational processes to align these with the requirements of the environment. As disturbance handler, the manager is required to contain those forces and events which tend to disturb the organizational equilibrium and normal functioning. These forces and events may be strike by employees, shortage of raw materials, employee complaints and grievances, etc. As resource allocator, the manager allocates resources, human, physical and financial, to various organizational units according to their needs. As negotiator, the manager negotiates with the various interest groups in the organization. Such interest groups may be shareholders, employees or outside agencies.
We shall now proceed to our next approach, that is, the functions approach. Managers are known by the work they do and the functions they perform. According to the functions approach given by Henry Fayol, in every organization, managers perform certain basic functions in order to achieve the results. These functions of management may broadly be classified as planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. Planning is the first function performed by a manager. The job of a manager begins with setting of objectives of the organization and goals in each area of the business. This is done through planning. Manager probes the present to find out where he is and he then forecasts future objectives which will indicate where he wants to be. That is, the destination to be reached. The alternatives to achieve the objectives are evaluated and the selected alternative becomes the part of action.
Through taking purposeful action regarding organization's future, the manager assumes the first managerial function, that is planning. Rather than managing somehow, he plans in advance the future course of action on the basis of facts and figures about the opportunities to be exploited and threats to overcome in future. A plan is a predetermined course of action to accomplish the predetermined objectives. Once the plan is formulated, the manager has to indicate the objectives of the plan and steps to be taken by his subordinates. By communicating, he makes the objectives effective. In practice, planning is all pervading. Planning makes things happen which could not otherwise occur. Planning involves developing objectives, strategies, policies, procedures, programs, etc. As it involves making choices, decision making lies at the heart of planning.
Organizing. Managing a business is not just planning. It includes putting life into the plan by bringing together the managerial personnel, employees, physical and financial resources, etc., to execute plans. When these resources are assembled, the organization comes to life. Organizing involves determining activities needed to fulfill the objectives, grouping these activities into manageable units, and assigning such groups of activities to managers. Delegation of authority creates an organization. It determines authority responsibility relationship.
Let us now move on to discuss delegation. Delegation of authority creates an organization. It determines authority responsibility relationship. These relationships must be properly coordinated to secure unity of organization. Hence, the work of managing includes both planning and preparing to do, that is, both planning and organizing. Organizing to achieve the plans is the tooling process or preparation for the work to be done. Planning involves thinking, deliberation and decision making regarding the future course of action. Organizing provides a framework of management or a mechanism for purposive, integrated and cooperative action by many people in a joint effort to implement any plan. Planning decides what management wants to do, while organizing provides an effective mechanism for achieving the plan or objectives. According to Louis Allen, organizing is the process of identifying and grouping the work to be performed, defining and delegating responsibility, and the authority and establishing relationships for the purpose of enabling people to work most effectively together in accomplishing objectives. Establishing superior subordinate relationships is an important task in organizing. The manager creates the structure of relationships that connects each employee directly or indirectly to the organization head. The connecting lines between superiors and subordinates provide for communication and transmission of plans, instructions, problems, and progress reports between the two. A sound organization structure is essential for effective and profitable performance. Without proper organization, there may be duplication of effort, inadequate attention to certain important functions, unwanted rivalry, and friction among personnel and delays in decision making.
Authority responsibility relationship. Staffing involves manning the various positions created by the organizing process. It includes preparing inventory of personnel available and identifying the gap between manpower required and available, identifying the sources from where people will be selected, selecting people, training and developing them, fixing their remuneration, appraising them periodically, etc.
There is controversy whether staffing function is to be performed by all managers in the organization or it is to be handled by the personnel department which looks after the personnel matters enumerated above. To make it convenient and clear, some processes of staffing are completed by the personnel department. In doing so, it facilitates the performance of staffing function by managers in the organization. For example, managers are required to appraise the performance of their subordinates. Personnel department can facilitate this function by prescribing and supplying the performer for this appraisal so that there is uniformity in the appraisal system throughout the organization. Similar support can be provided by personnel department in other aspects of staffing.
Periodically, etc. When plans are formulated and the structure of the organization is determined or laid down, the next step would be to direct and supervise the subordinates toward attainment of organizational goals. A manager must develop the ability to command and lead. He must know how to direct others, that is, how to issue orders and instructions without arousing resentment or offense, and he must be able to secure willing obedience from his subordinates without destroying their initiative and creativity. The function of directing is also termed as leading, guiding, motivating, teaching, stimulating, and actuating. Controlling is the last phase of management process. It is the process of establishing performance standards, measuring actual results or present performance, comparing those results with the set standard, finding out the reason for deviations of actual from desired result and taking corrective action wherever necessary. Thus, ensuring the achievement of objectives and plans of organization is termed as controlling function.
Controlling is devising ways and means of assuring that planned performance is actually achieved. Through the controlling function, the manager keeps the organization on the right track. Controlling can be either positive or negative. Positive control tries to ensure that the organizational goals are effectively and efficiently achieved. Negative control tries to ensure that undesirable activities do not occur or recur. Essentially, controlling function involves three elements: establishing standards of performance, measuring current performance, and comparing it against the established standards and taking corrective actions to correct any performance that does not meet those standards.
Is termed as controlling function. We will now discuss relationship among the management functions. As far as the relationship between managerial functions is concerned, All managerial functions are necessary and are related and interrelated to each other. Managerial functions are inseparable. Each function blends into the other and each mutually affects the performance of the others. Moreover, they have to be performed in a sequence.
In an organization, managers at all levels need to plan, organize, direct, and control. There are, however, differences about the amount of time they devote to each of these functions. The amount of time that lower level managers spend on planning is much less than top level ones. At lower levels, managers spend relatively more time in directing. In contrast, managers at higher levels spend a greater proportion of their time on planning. Planning at higher levels also tend to be long range planning. The amount of time spent on controlling function is fairly consistent at all levels of management except at the very top level. Also, time devoted to the organizing function is fairly consistent at all levels of management. Again, at lower levels, managers may be specialists, but at higher levels, it is essential that they may be generalists who can see beyond the boundaries of functional areas.
Moreover, they have to be performed in a sequence. In an organization, managers at all levels need to plan, organize, direct, and control. There are, however, differences about the amount of time they devote to each of these functions. The amount of time that lower level managers spend on planning is much less than top level ones. The amount of time spent on the controlling function is fairly consistent at all levels of management except at the very top level. Also, time devoted to the organizing function is fairly consistent at all levels of management. Now that we are clear with the concept of both the approaches, let us now reconcile both these approaches and understand how one fits into the other.
Follow-up studies on validity of Mintzberg's roles approach largely came out with the supportive evidence on managerial roles cited by him. This approach still suffers from two limitations. First, the type of roles that have been identified by Mintzberg are not applicable to all types of managers, particularly those at lower levels. Second, there are many other managerial roles which have not been included in the list. For example, manager as a controller, as a coordinator, etc. Nevertheless, Mintzberg gave a new insight about what managers do. Management functions and roles do not exist opposite to each other, but these are two ways of interpreting what managers do. Most of the roles prescribed by Mintzberg can be integrated with earlier classification of management function viewed by Wren and Voigt.
These approaches and understand how one fits into the other. The reconciliation between functions and roles approaches of managerial jobs shows that in planning, a manager performs informational and decisional roles as he collects relevant information on the basis of which he makes decisions. In organizing, he performs decisional role by allocating duties and resources to organizational units and makes way for the coordinating of these units. In staffing, he performs interpersonal role. In directing, the manager performs interpersonal and informational roles by interacting with the subordinates, leading, motivating, and communicating with them. In controlling, thus, we can say that the functions approach of management is more comprehensive as compared to Mintzberg's role approach and is more valid for further analysis. Let us summarize what we have learned in this module. In this module, we have discussed the concept of managerial functions, the two approaches, that is, the function approach and the role approach, the relationships between the management functions, and at the last, we also discussed the reconciliation of the two approaches.
Let us now recapitulate what we have learned in this module. Various authors have defined managerial functions differently. Some favor only 3 to 4 functions, while others expand the list to add many more functions. Gulick suggested functions of a manager through an acronym PODSCO. To better understand the functions of a manager, one can look at the two approaches, namely roles approach and functions approach. Although there are 14 approaches, the focus here is restricted only to two approaches. The roles approach. The managerial roles approach describes 10 roles played by a manager, namely figurehead, leader, liaison, recipient, disseminator, spokesperson, entrepreneurial, disturbance handler, resource allocator, negotiator. This approach is popularized by Henry Mintzberg of McGill University. According to Mintzberg, managers do not perform the classical managerial functions of planning, organizing, leading, coordinating, and controlling. Instead, they engage in a variety of other activities or roles. These roles can be classified into three categories: interpersonal roles, informational roles, and decision roles. The functions approach defines managers are known by the work they do, the functions they perform. According to the functions approach originated by Henry Fayol, in every organization, managers perform certain basic functions in order to achieve the results. These functions may broadly be classified as planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. Planning is the first function of management, involves setting objectives, determining ways and means to accomplish objectives, deciding in advance future course of action, developing alternatives require thought and action. Planning is the thinking function. Strategies, policies, procedures, programs, methods, schedules, projects are examples of plans. Organizing. Identifying and grouping the work to be performed, establishing superior subordinate relationships is important to an organization. Bringing together people and other resources to execute plans is organizing. Developing authority responsibility relationships, delegation of authority, and accountability are integral to organizing. Staffing. Preparing inventory of people, finding gaps between availability and requirements, identifying sources of manpower, selecting suitable people and manning them at various positions, providing training, fixing remuneration, and appraising people comes under the purview of the third function of management called staffing. Directing. Supervising subordinates, issuing them orders and instructions to get things done without inviting resentment and securing willing obedience from subordinates is directing function. Leading and guiding people for better work performance is the job of a manager. Controlling. Measuring current performance, comparing it with standards laid down, finding out deviations if any, finding reasons for deviations and taking corrective or remedial actions is controlling. 5 functions of management are interrelated and interdependent. They are inseparable and necessary. They must be performed in sequence as planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. Time spent for various functions of management differs at low, middle, and top levels of management. Planning and controlling is mainly performed at top level, while lower level managers are largely concerned with directing. Functions and roles of management are not opposite to each other. Fayol's functions approach is more comprehensive than Mintzberg's roles approach.